I want to tell you about an intermarriage catch-22. I received a call from Minneapolis, and the couple was getting married, of course. I asked my usual question, are you in love? They said yes. I said, great. They would have been fine with a co-officiated marriage, but they couldn't find a rabbi in Minneapolis who would do it. Now, they could have had the wedding with just a priest, but the Jewish family hit the ceiling. The Jewish family suggested, let's get a justice of the peace. We'll have a purely civil ceremony. The Christian family hit the ceiling because they wanted a religious ceremony. The Christian family would have accepted only a rabbi at the ceremony, but they couldn't find a rabbi who would do it. So they could have a justice of the peace, but that wasn't good for the Christian family. They could have just a priest, but that wasn't good for the Jewish family. They were stuck, and I wasn't available. But this is not only a Jewish problem. One of my closest friends from college is from a Hindu family. He fell in love in medical school with a wonderful woman from a Syrian Christian background. In fact, he had to perpetually explain to his Hindu family that even though they were from Syria, no, they are not Muslim. They are actually Christian from Syria. They didn't get it. Now, this couple would have loved to have me officiate at the ceremony. It's one of my closest friends. But a humanistic Jewish rabbi marrying a secular Hindu and a Syrian Christian was just a bridge too far for both of their families, and it didn't work. I got to do a reading. They wound up getting married by a white Unitarian minister who at least looked like the American establishment, and that way it was acceptable to both immigrant families. So they had the hechsher, the kosher stamp of America. You see, one of the realities that we face in the world of intermarriage and outreach is that it's not going to be intermarriage for that long for many people. In some cases, it's the end of marriage, whether it's common law marriage as we see in Israel, or simply living together as we see in France and in Europe. And in many cases, Jews living with other people are living with non-Jews. And maybe the reason they don't get married is they don't want the hassle of having to deal with what it would take to get married. So why bother? You see, the Jews are like everyone else, only more so. We have been pioneers again and again throughout our history. We have been pioneers in anti-idolatry in the 7th century BCE. We were pioneers in diaspora identity in Babylonia and in Alexandria before the destruction of the Second Temple. We were pioneers in the capitalist culture of the feudal age. We were pioneers in multiculturalism, trying to live separately in an America that is not a melting pot, where all the differences vanish, but rather to try and envision an America that is a stew, where each ingredient contributes something to the taste of the whole, even though the longer they stay in the stew, the mushier the boundaries become. Why should the Jews not be pioneers in the world of multicultural identity? After all of these past transitions had their advantages. Diaspora identity let us survive military defeat and physical dispersion. Dare we ask, what are the benefits of intermarriage? That is, aside from giving the Jews something more positive to do on Christmas than grumble through Chinese food at the movies. One benefit, it's one more sign of living in an open and free society, and a more accepting one. Yoni Saracen in his presentation commented that this generation has almost never experienced their Jewishness as a danger to their life or as a limit to their progress. And surveys definitely show major declines in American anti-Semitic attitudes, even though other parts of the world, like Europe, the Middle East, have other challenges. The truth is that they wouldn't be marrying us if they hated us. Non-Jewish people sign up for J-Date because they want to find someone Jewish. Now, this is not to say that an intermarriage, or any marriage for that matter, is always smooth. And there are still some on either side of some interpartnerships, parents, grandparents, who are rejectionists, we know that. But sometimes the actual marriage or the arrival of grandchildren can have a positive effect. One example, my mother was on a cruise ship. She sat down for dinner the first night with the same people they were going to be with the entire length of the cruise. And they were chit-chatting about this and that, and the man of a couple, about their age, made some comment about someone Jewed him down over something. And while her full Anti-Defamation League fury was rising, his wife smacked him on the shoulder and said, "You idiot, your son-in-law is Jewish." Now, we have to understand the effect of that marriage on these older generations. Because the grandchildren of that man will grow up knowing the family is Jewish. He didn't stop being Jewish by marrying it. He is Jewish. Your son-in-law is Jewish. And the grandchildren will grow up knowing the family is at least somewhat Jewish and not tolerating that language of Jewdom down, just as their grandmother doesn't tolerate that language anymore. Intermarriage is not just inevitable in an open society, it helps to further create a still more open and still more accepting society. You can ask the question, as Rabbi Moss did in her presentation, is Israel an open and free society if this basic human right to marry whom you love is possible by going outside the state, but not possible staying where you live? A benefit of intermarriage? It tests our values, what Paul Golan called the moral argument for inclusion. We are told to love your neighbor as yourself. We are told to love the stranger because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Now, do these principles only apply to the historical Jewish experience of living in ghettos or dense Jewish neighborhoods where your neighbor was Jewish and often the same kind of Jewish? Is that what it means to love your neighbor only there? Or is the ger, the stranger, the one you should love and not oppress? Is that ger really only a convert, as the rabbis early interpreted it, making what we consider a universal ethic into a very parochial one? My mother grew up in a very liberal Jewish family. They were involved in both Reform Judaism and also in Workman's Circle, Shalom Aleichem, the Jewish left, which was very progressive on civil rights. And then once she brought home an African-American man for a date. And guess what happened? Some objections. And she was astounded because they had always talked this wonderful game about civil rights and equality and treat everyone the same. And her grandmother said to her, "Look, you can marry one of two black people," that was the word. "You can marry him if he is President of the United States or Harry Belafonte." What are our Jewish values? Even if we acknowledge that Jews don't have the patent and don't have the monopoly on ethics. We didn't invent ethics because they come from the human experience and show up in all cultures. And many peoples love learning, and many people love to make you show how you love them by eating more food. That's not uniquely Jewish. If our Jewish values, which we learn from Jewish teaching and from the Jewish historical experience, if those values are things like tolerance, acceptance, treating others as you would be treated, then can we really live those values? If Jewish pride and Jewish self-esteem encourage us to celebrate our Jewishness in our family, no matter whom our partner is, can we have the courage to extend to our partner the same dignity, the same courtesy we demand for ourselves, and let them celebrate their identity? A benefit. An intermarriage can be an inspiration to think about what it means to the Jewish partner to be Jewish. Rabbi Jiris told a wonderful story about, a problematic story about a couple who had very different ideas of what it meant to be both. For one, it was, both means we'll get them baptized and go to church and Catholic school, and we'll do Jewish holidays at home. That was not what the Jewish partner thought of when she thought of both. But it made her think, it made him think about, what is my identity to me, not just what I want to pass on to the future. If the non-Jewish partner wants to include their side of their cultural heritage, the Jewish partner has to think about their side as well. In fact, there's no guarantee that two Jews marrying each other will create a positive Jewish connection for their children. Now, there is a risk. You can result in another kind of catch-22, and I've seen this happen. It's called identity paralysis. There's a humanistic Jewish partner and a raised, very Christian partner who's no longer actively Christian. His parents, however, are still very actively Christian. They have two children. She wants to involve them in some kind of congregation community. And if they do anything Jewish, he says, well, I need to find a church then. She says, okay, let's look at a church. Every church he goes to, he doesn't like. because it's not what he remembers, and he doesn't believe it anyways. So then they can't join a Jewish connection because he can't find a church that he wants, but he doesn't really admit the fact that he's not sure where he fits. This is part of the challenge, and it's a risk, but also possibly a benefit. Another benefit, I call it deepening the gene pool, or as mentioned yesterday, hybrid vigor. What is hybrid vigor? In biology, it's the sometimes amazingly beautiful and creative product created by cross-pollinating different branches on the human tree. In plants, the products are stronger, they're certainly different than either parent if they're bred to the same kind over and over again. So the gene for Tay-Sachs disease may well be linked to verbal intelligence, but if you know what Tay-Sachs disease does to people, deepening the gene pool is probably a good idea. And we have to understand, with 80% of Jews going to college, a significant number going to post-undergraduate study, who are they going to meet and marry? It's people at the other deep end of the gene pool. Hybrid vigor is good for Jewish culture. Hybrid vigor is not just about people, it's about creativity. The word afikomen at the end of Passover comes from epikomenos, Greek for what you eat after the meal. You can't understand Maimonides without knowing that he read Aristotle. I loved learning this morning that the word dati comes from Persian. Watch heads explode when you try and pass on this information. Think about the impact of feminism on Jewish life. It wasn't an innately Jewish process, because then you'd have a Gloria Steinem who came out of Chabad. But she didn't. It was an outside process, and then Jewish women began to ask, why is it I'm more included out there than I am in the synagogue? I mean, even the Beis Yaakov schools, these Orthodox Jewish schools, didn't start in 1525. They started in 1917 because they were losing hundreds and hundreds of Jewish girls who were going to secular Zionist and Yiddish schools because they would teach the girls. Maya Escobar's creativity and possibly her boundless energy and enthusiasm are only possible through the wonders of this hybrid vigor. And I was struck by a beautiful image that Rabbi Moss used in one of the discussions. She said, when you put together a puzzle, each piece has to be different, and you find a way to fit it all together and make the whole. And after all, we also found out it increases the Jewish population above replacement levels. The Israel Museum is a marvelous example. It's in Israel, but it's a collection of world culture. A benefit? Intermarriage demonstrates clearly that everyone has a story. And in Paul Golan's words, demographics are evil. If 3/4 of the Jews are X, that tells you precisely nothing about the particular person you are meeting. As Rabbi Jairus has said many times, you don't marry a non-Jew, you marry an individual, one of whose characteristics is that he or she is actually something else. No one is nothing. I mean, there's an absurdity to the category of non-Jewish, because the Jews are 0.2% of the world's population, and a category that includes 99.8% of the group is useless. A Jewish-Irish partnership is very different from a Jewish-Italian partnership, which is different from a Jewish-African-American partnership, which is different from a Jewish-Guatemalan partnership, which is not the same as a Jewish-Mexican partnership. There is no actual individual experience of being Jewish-Asian. Because what is Asian? 2 billion, 3 billion people in a variety of cultures and identities? You're Jewish-Chinese, like the children of the tiger mother, Amy Chua. Remember, her husband was Jewish. Or Jewish-Japanese, like Paul's children would be. There is no story like Maya Escobar's story. Her personality, her experiences are her own. Even if we need to understand general trends, demographic groups, common experiences, there is only so far we can go. Maya's creative integration of her Guatemalan and her Jewish identities is hers. But if we demand that you create community with your identity clones, Jewish-Irish over here, Jewish-Mexican over there, Jewish-Guatemalan over here, you'll be hard-pressed to have more than a congregation of one. I wanted to ask a question of our panelists yesterday afternoon. We didn't have the chance. Are you more comfortable among dual heritage Jews, even with different specific stories? Or do you want to be integrated in the broader Jewish institutions? It's a very interesting parallel to the experience of gay and lesbian Jews. For a time, there was a desire to create separate institutions of comfort and home. And now, as the mainstream liberal Jewish movements have become more accepting and welcoming and incorporating their identities, and they find also that a gay-only synagogue doesn't mean you're all the same theology or you're all the same ritual practice. So now they find, with gay rabbis in both Reform and Conservative seminaries possible, maybe there's a home for them. You see, it's not either or. It can be what they say in Hebrew, gam v'gam, this and that. We hope, perhaps, that it will be a chavurah within a congregation instead of a separate ghetto, whether it's chosen or not. Sivan raised the challenge of separate categories of marriage. What does that create? How does that affect our unity or the schism of the Jewish people? There is a power to I don't care, but there's also a power to not being there. So there are clearly benefits to intermarriage. But despite those benefits, I am not planning to divorce my wonderful wife and run up to sign up for non-J-date. I am not less tolerant because I married someone Jewish. I married for love, which is a basic human right and the right thing to do. The key point, as Rabbi Jairus has said many times, you don't marry a label, you marry a person. And maybe that partnership produces a child, and that child grows up, and that child, who is no longer a child, is what brought us here to this weekend. Now, I want to give you one confession and one expression of gratitude. The confession is that we did not produce the definitive conference on the heirs of intermarriage, because there are simply too many variables to possibly include in 1 or 2 or 3 weekends, or weeks, or years. Some of the roads not taken that we could look down and keep for another day, voices we didn't hear here. Someone raised nothing. Someone raised to know they were Jewish with no positive content, but you're Jewish. Someone raised Unitarian or Quaker or some other variety of liberal Protestant that would admit a kind of dual identity. Some of those raised with no knowledge of being Jewish who discover it later in life, like Susan Jacoby of the memoir Half Jew, which is a more positive story, or you have the negative example, like Virginia Senator and Senate candidate George Allen. You may remember in his re-election campaign, he discovered that his mother was in fact a North African Jew who had hidden it from him all these years, and then he had an awful press interview where he said, I'll quote him, "I still had a ham sandwich for lunch, and my mother made great pork chops." He had to prove his bona fides, his credentials for running for Senate as a Republican in Virginia, even though his mother was Jewish, so he proves it by pork. Well, we did not include the voices of Christian clergy who facilitate groups raising children as both. We did not include a spectrum of rabbis, Reform rabbis, conservative rabbis, Reconstructionists, renewal rabbis, Orthodox rabbis. We didn't do that. We didn't explore the questions of gender identification, that there are times when a child of a Jewish, non-Jewish partnership, even if the category is meaningless, I have to use it, so I'll use it. Does that child identify with the parent of the same gender? Some parents choose to raise their children in the identity of the parent of the same gender. Sometimes it happens in a divorce, and then it's very contentious. But sometimes it happens by design. And what effect does that have? Now again, if one parent's a jerk and the other one's nice, maybe they go a different direction. But is that a pattern too? We didn't include the perspective of Messianic Jews, which for, I hear the boos, which for some individuals who feel both Christian and Jewish, that for them feels like the perfect home. We probably spent much too much time in this conference talking about them instead of involving them in the conversation, because they are us. In fact, the main response panel was just Jewish most of the time, and even if Maya Escobar's schedule had cooperated better so she could be part of these response panels, that would have been 1 out of 10 voices. And maybe we took too much for granted here. It would be easy for us in secular humanistic Judaism to say, well, we told you so to the Jewish world. We have a long history of inclusion and inclusiveness. We've officiated intercultural and interfaith wedding ceremonies for decades and decades. We were pioneers in pushing the reform movement in a new direction. Our 1988 acceptance of the self-declaration as a standard of being Jewish, it was part of our service on Friday night. We did it almost 25 years ago. You know, the irony is we're the only Jewish movement that uses the same standard of being Jewish as the people who count Jews. How do demographers count who's Jewish? Well, if you say you're Jewish, we'll count you as Jewish. Why don't the organizations consider something similar? Well, we do, and we have for 25 years. Now, the challenge is it only counts to say, I told you so, if anyone ever heard you. You see, if they haven't heard of us, if they don't know what we've said, then we can't say, I told you so. We can say, I said it, but you missed it. That's why I love the idea of this global campaign that Sivan was talking about in her presentation. We have to stop male discrimination in Judaism. It's a great tagline, right? Because you should get to make Jews too. Equal opportunity Jewish production. That's our agenda. Now, there's only so much we can do. We have our own priorities and points of emphasis in a conference, while we've made some choices and not others. And if other organizations consider a similar conference in the future, and I sincerely hope that they do, and I hope they invite us to participate in them, when those conferences take place, they will be different. But that would only be appropriate given the diversity of the subject. So that's my confession. What gratitude do I have? This is a very personal topic, and everyone has a story. I've heard many of these stories here, in the sessions, in conversations with people. People want to tell their story. They want to have their story heard. The coming out model of the LGBTQ world has experienced for decades. It's now being adopted by atheists and humanists to say, don't be hidden, say who you are. Well, guess what? It applies to multi-heritage Jews too. If people say, I wish intermarriage never existed, you say, then I wouldn't be here. As an aside, by the way, even those leaving Orthodoxy have begun to adopt some of this technology. They have a new website. It's a version of the online videos called It Gets Better. This one is called It Gets Besser. If you leave Hasidism, it gets besser. We've learned from every speaker that each story is particular and different and unique. But we also learned there are challenges to that. After the panel discussion yesterday afternoon on one, both, or neither, Maya Escobar came up to me to tell me that I need to emphasize that there is no fully safe space. Someone is going to say something to try to put you in the corner they want to put you in and define you as they want to define you. Of course, you have to realize that you are doing the same thing to them at the same time. This is what human beings do to each other. We have to understand it, we have to work with it, we have to challenge it. And we also understand, drawing on a canonical intercultural relationship movie of the 1980s called Dirty Dancing, no one puts Maya Escobar in the corner. Now, I want to share some lessons we've learned from this conference, lessons that we in secular humanistic Judaism can learn, but also lessons for the Jewish world as a whole, and while we're at it, for the rest of humanity. You know, when you describe Jews and non-Jews, it's similar to the Israeli attitude of haaretz and chutz la'aretz. There's in the land and everything else. Or in America, you can think of that famous New Yorker map of the states where there's New York City and LA and maybe Boca Raton, and that's about it. It's what I call the meocentric theory of the universe. Well, let's talk about this idea. What's the first lesson? It's the power of that personal story. Maya Escobar made it dramatically. Her framework was her life. That was how she got across her message. But you also hear it in Paul Golan's personal passion. I love that he defines passion as the positive intermarriage of love and anger. From his own experience and what he imagines going forward for his family. And from our panelists, Jared Jackson, Erica Sosa, Nika Jacobson, and Sarah Buxbaum, and from all the couples and heirs of intermarriage whom we welcome when they come to us with a mazel tov instead of oy vey. We've heard experiences of rejection, even Jewish racism, but also experiences of welcome and comfort, even finding one's own community. We heard Maya's story. We may know more about her than we wanted to know, but we know. But of course, we only know what she told us about her. We saw the images she chose to present, and she's very conscious of the images she presents. We know the labels, the Fermi, the Jap, the sexy Latina. But her point was that these labels, the identities, these little boxes that people try to put us in do not define who we are. She articulated beautifully the power of projection. They see her profile and they write off these terrible things to her. They assume she's the hot tamale. Think of that striking image of her repeating over and over again in a small box, "Yo soy Frida Kahlo, yo soy Frida Kahlo, yo soy Frida Kahlo. You must be Frida Kahlo. You have to be Frida Kahlo. You're just like Frida Kahlo." Maya's genius in that piece is it makes us want to break the box, to yell back, "No, you're not. No, we're not. Break free from that pinhole boundary. Don't be defined by what other people are telling you." But we are sometimes defined by what other people tell us. Yoni pointed out, if someone says, "Am I authentically Jewish?" it's probably because someone said they weren't. There was a challenge there that provokes the question. There are no templates. There is no majority experience anymore. Just like white America in a few years, when white Americans, compared to everything else, will not be the majority. Yes, there are more intermarried households than Jewish households. But there is tremendous diversity among those intermarried households. Are they intercultural, with two secular people with different ethno-religious traditions? Are they intercultural with one who doesn't care about his family traditions and one who does? Are they secular and a religious person in one household? Do they celebrate both family holidays at home or only one? Do they go to synagogue or church once in a while, regularly? No one group is going to be the future. You hear this from a lot of advocacy groups, by the way, whether it's being both or half Jewish. We are the future, they say. Well, guess what? We don't know the future. But more importantly, there is no one future. It's not going to be both. It's not going to be cultural Judaism. It's not going to be conversion. None of those is the dominant narrative going forward because there is no dominant narrative. There's no one strategy to address all of these personal stories. We are all inter-something. Interfaith, intercultural, interethnic, interphilosophical, interfamily experience. Maybe we should just call them interfamilies. Or maybe at this point, just call them families. Maybe we need to be broader to be more accurate. After all, a nuclear family can mean any number of kids. Maybe a Jewish family can have any number, any percent of Jewish people in the house. Most important, as our half-Jewish experiences panelists emphasized, we need to listen to their stories, to read their books, not tell them what we want to tell them. Think of a bumper sticker I saw once. Teaching without learning is just talking. In outreach without listening is telling people what you want them to do, not giving them what they really want. Lesson number 2. Being Jewish is not either or. There's an irony in Maya's title of her presentation, Fractured Identity. She's always bringing her halves together rather than experiencing them at one at a time. She weaves a Guatemalan napkin for her husband with a very unsubtle reminder that she made it, and she makes it into a challah cover to use on Shabbat. Dan Levinson said it very well. He said, we are 100% of all of our identities, not part one and part another. Can you be Jewish and? Of course you can. I am Jewish and white and male and suburban and Ashkenazi on my mother's side and Syrian Jewish on my father's side and a million other characteristics simultaneously. You do not even have to choose between Jewish and Israeli. You could be both. Or as we heard yesterday, is anyone half mother and half father? Being Jewish can be a sense of family. Family memories and positive connections that make you want to seek the same for your family going forward. That helps to define a sense of Jewishness from generation to generation. Len Davidman talked about a sense of connectedness to the family history, the power of belonging, even if you can't always put your finger on what you're belonging to. Is it being loud and arguing? Is it having a limited sense of restraint? Is it your ethical commitments? Who knows what else people will come up with? Is it identifying with Nobel Prize winners? You see, there are blurred boundaries of what is Jewish, but there have always been blurred boundaries of what was Jewish. And reaching out to the heirs of intermarriage is not either or either. Okay. Some have a positive connection with the concept, with the terminology of half Jewish, but others are strongly negative on it. And as Paul pointed out very astutely, you have to find a way to appeal to one without alienating the other one. Maybe you need a Hillel for what Hillel does well, being a building, a place to go for services and kosher food, and you need something else out there where the people are, reaching out by word of mouth, one pure connection at a time, to find everyone else. If Hillel is like the chaplain's office, the official structure and establishment, we need some kind of campus crusade for Judaism, although crusade might not be the best word to use for reaching out towards Jews. But you get the idea. If there are gates and gatekeepers, there need to be gate openers too, people who help you step over the barriers. Lesson number 3. Just as Jews are like everyone else, only more so too are the half-Jewish, like other Jews. Yoni and Dan talked very eloquently about the new experience of this emerging adulthood population. Jewish, not Jewish, half-Jewish, doesn't matter. It's a time of identity exploration. It's a time of possibility, but also instability. There's a focus on the self. And by the way, I know plenty of so-called emerged adults who don't get past the focus on the self stage. There's feeling in between. There are new circumstances of this generation. I did the math. Someone who is 19 years old, someone who is 19 years old was born the same year I got my first email account when I went to college. They've never known a world without email, without internet, without all of these innovations. You know, we jokingly say, how could I have managed before cell phones? How did we ever manage before cell phones? And I remember seeing a picture on Facebook once, this is the idea of created community, where there was a cassette tape and a pencil. And it said, our children will have no idea what these two items had to do with each other. And for those watching this on video, you used it to wind the tape if it got left off. Just like you have to translate Hebrew, you've got to translate the memories. Generations change so radically, but this generation is very, very different. Lynn Davidman told us about the children of Jewish fathers and non-Jewish mothers who hear from others that they're not Jewish, but they want to be Jewish, even if they don't know very much. But after all, why should they be different from the Jews who are two Jewish parents and don't know very much? It's the same dynamic. We learned that it's likely the majority of campus students with some Jewish connection have only one Jewish parent. In some cases, no Jewish parents. But the key question is often not whether they have one Jewish parent or two Jewish parents, but about the engagement they have with Jewish life, the quality of their Jewish experiences growing up in their family. Do they have good memories? Were they close with their extended family? Another vocabulary that I discussed with Yoni and Dan before the colloquium, the question of the insider and the outsider. You can be an insider with one Jewish parent if you feel like you are part of the community. You can feel like an outsider with two if you're not. We don't know what the future is going to be, as if we ever did. Jewish forecasting is even less accurate than the weather report. Now, it may well be that to attract the heirs of intermarriage and their parents, and frankly, anyone, a lot has to change. The model of requirements, the model of obligations, guilt, shame. We have no shame anymore. It just doesn't work. Today, you can leave the Jewish label behind. You don't have to be a Jewish Buddhist, a Jewish anarchist. You can just be what you want. If people want a service, they find a lot of community on the cheap or free. They want the service, they'll pay for the service, but that's it. They'll support causes they value, and so we need a value statement. Why is it worth it to be Jewish? And why is it worth it to be Jewish with us? Lesson number 4. It's not as bad as we think. There are some Jews out there who would insist the glass is a quarter empty, even if it's actually 3/4 full and there's no debate. They would still insist it's a quarter empty. Yoni mentioned the description of the Jews as the ever-dying people, or Paul Golan's phrase, the fear-based economy of Jewish organizations. At least we have some improvements in more officiants being willing to do ceremonies, but we have to understand it's nowhere near to match what the people want. Remember that American Jewish Committee survey? 57% said they wanted rabbis to co-officiate weddings. And if you combine that with the 15% who said that they should officiate alone, you have 72% saying that there should be rabbis involved in intermarriages in some capacity. That is not the percent of rabbis in America who will officiate at these intermarriages. And Paul told us, again, it's not as bad as we think or as we thought, that the Jewish community conversation today is not about whether to welcome interfaith families, but how to welcome them. We have a strong majority of the children of intermarriages who have positive feelings about being Jewish, despite a high awareness that patrilineal descent is rejected by a large part of the Jewish community. Although maybe not the majority. If we did that question, that would be interesting. And they find their connections through secular Jewish or personal culture, movies, and things they can do at home, not institutions, and even college Judaic studies classes. More children of intermarriage take Judaic studies classes than children of Jewish parents. Birthright has sent over 100,000 heirs of intermarriage to Israel, and that program's disruptive model of an inclusive community, for all of its flaws and imperfections, for its limits and restrictions, we talked about the variables of service providers and the messages they present, we understand inclusivity can make a difference. I was struck by a statistic that Paul brought that here in the Chicago Jewish community, something like half of the children of interfaith families are being raised Jewish. Only 9% are being raised Christian. In his words, examples like this, what's been happening in Boston with a lot of meaningful and substantial outreach to interfaith families, shows that with the right response, we're winning. Although the organized Jewish community thinks we're more like Charlie Sheen, winning, but not. You see, the outreach to intermarried families can be as challenging as public space Judaism. But it's also as familiar as our own friends and family. Keruv outreach is not to strangers sometimes. We're not welcoming the stranger, we're welcoming the new member of our family. Just as there is no one model of intercultural family that will win, I also believe there will always be synagogues of some kind. That model of Jewish community will continue to have people who want it and who will pay for it. It may be smaller, it may be different, but it will be there for the foreseeable future. And the same for ideology. Dan and Yoni feel that this generation, unlike the previous one, doesn't care about ideology. But if the history of secular humanistic Judaism over the last 40-plus years has taught us anything, it's that many Jews of all ages do not care about ideology or the words they're saying. The kids are the same as their parents and grandparents. Many of all of those generations are very lowercase s secular in their personal behavior, in their personal beliefs, their theology, but they still continue to join synagogues for a limited window of time, give their kids the bar mitzvah training that they hated themselves, and say the old blessings they sort of remember. They don't care about ideology either, of any generation. You see, maybe we in our movement are slow learners, but nevertheless, ani ma'amin b'chavaya shlema. I believe with complete experience, not faith, with complete experience, that ideas, beliefs, a philosophy of life can be exactly the technology, the make your life better experience that will make Judaism and secular humanistic Judaism attractive to the heirs of intermarriage and to everyone else. Sivan spoke very articulately about the empowerment of positive beliefs, of saying out loud what you believe, of living those beliefs in your values. Marry how you want. Celebrate your bar and bar mitzvah how you want. Welcome your child how you want. Make it relevant to you. You are empowered to do that. And to do it in a way that's consistent with what you believe. You find out what you believe by how you live. And it may well be that your beliefs and your life are a humanistic, secular lifestyle. Unless you think that ideas like honesty, dignity, feeling empowered over your own life, let alone honesty and dignity and feeling empowered over your Jewish life, if you think those things have nothing to do with living a good and satisfying life, then we have nothing to offer. But of course they do. And that's what we can offer. You see, there's a limit to the fee-for-service model. What should I charge to visit someone in the hospital? Should I take credit cards? Should I bill by the quarter hour? You see, people may not want to pay for the building. You know, we sometimes have the edifice complex in Jewish life. But if you open up to other spaces, the new sacred spaces that are made sacred by us being in them, then you have some flexibility, it costs less, there's a lot of advantages. It's a community production. At the same time, people will pay for expertise. Sivan's story about taking that student to the museum and showing them the menorot and seeing that that was what sparked her interest, and she was a creative person coming up with a creative artistic project to connect with them. It's hard to buy that kind of expertise by shopping in the phone book. You find it through community, you find it through personal references, but you need people who are trained, who have that expertise, that perceptiveness, that creativity to make something relevant to the student. In humanistic Judaism, for many, many years, we've done this personalized, relevant approach to the bar and bar mitzvah. Choose a hero who speaks to your life. Choose a Hebrew reading from Torah or Tanakh or from modern Jewish literature that speaks to ideas that you value. Talk about an issue. Talk about your family. We've had projects on synagogue architecture and on righteous Gentiles who saved Jews during the Holocaust and on Albert Einstein. So you can have the draw on the Nobel Prize winner connection. But you can have the creative, artistic connection. You can have people who have trouble learning how to read and learning how to read Hebrew have a meaningful ceremony that connects to Jewish culture, as a people, as an experience. We can do it. You notice I use a lot of words there to describe what it means to be Jewish. Well, that's another lesson we have to learn, that labels just don't stick. If we're talking about what it means to be half Jewish, what does it mean to be Jewish? And what does it mean to be half something? Or is there no one Jewish anymore? Be it a schism between the accepting and restrictive, as Dan mentioned, or is it a diffusion into ethnic diversity, which has resonance for me, not just with Jewish privilege or matrilineal privilege to be assumed I'm Jewish, but also Ashkenazi privilege. The most meaningful melody to sing the four questions for me is not the Ashkenazi melody. In my own personal story, I'm half Sephardi, I'm half Ashkenazi, even though my Passover dietary laws are my own. I love that ham and cheese on matzah. It's excellent. Now, Lynn Davidman asked, is being Jewish a religion, despite the fact that many Jews are not religious? Is being Jewish a political nation, even given the diversity of population we saw in Israel? And after all, most of the Jews are not in the state from the world or citizens subject to its legal authority. Is being Jewish an ethnicity, a people? Well, are we a group with a common and distinctive biological, linguistic, cultural heritage? Maybe there's Hebrew, but there's lots of other languages, and there's lots of other clothings, and there's lots of other colors and faces and noses, even though evidently every Jew has one. But given the Jewish diversity of appearance and cultural expression, maybe it's Judaism's, or maybe it's a family. It's a Jewish family. For those who were here on Saturday evening, we showed a clip of Sherwin Wine talking about one of the roots of secular humanistic Judaism, and he said, it's a family. It's always, at its origin, was an am, a nation, a people, a collection of clans and tribes. As he put it, I have to steal the joke from him, not all Methodists were descended from John Wesley, or all Lutherans descended from Martin Luther. But we claim a common descent. We claim a family connection. And a family includes people of all perspectives, conservative, liberal, religious, not religious, varieties within that spectrum or diversity or dichotomy. Or think about the modern sociologist definition, perhaps the best one. A group that regards itself and is seen by others as distinct. That's what we are. It's true for Jews despite the varieties. Are we religious or secular? Is it a dichotomy? Is it a spectrum? Well, in the end, we have to understand that this identity, these labels, these cards, are very different in different places. You see, in America, being Jewish is optional. It's a choice. In Israel, you get an official card that tells you what you are. And maybe they make alternative cards that can tell you something else. But there is an official yes or no, in or out. It's a very different dynamic there than here. That optionality here versus the requirement there. In some ways, if the end of requirements are happening, we talked about it, maybe we're the vanguard here in America. But we keep getting stuck on this language of race, half, quarter, drops of Jewish blood. Remember, according to Reb Sandler, we have Ann Landers, her sister Dear Abby, and Harrison Ford is a quarter Jewish, which is not too shabby. We are members of the tribe. And we use the concept of race to define being Jewish even into the Nazi period, into the 1930s. And after that, we let it go, but it's there. It's part of our background and our ideas. We talk about biological essentialism. We have pride in the Nobel Prize winners. We use that phrase, the Yiddische Kopf, which has its unfortunate parallel. Jewish smarts and the alternative. We prefer being called Jewish rather than a Jew. It's an interesting question. Why? Maybe it's the history of dirty Jew. Or maybe being a Jewish person means you're also a full person. It's a part of who you are, but not always what you are, no matter where. By the way, some of the less connected Jews of all stripes, be they heirs of intermarriage or otherwise, will sometimes call themselves, I'm Jewish. Now, even a self-labeled half-Jewish person like Robin Margolis, founder of the Half-Jewish Network, describes her experiences traveling back and forth between two ethno-religious countries, even if she didn't settle in one. But other groups like the Beta Gershom reject the concept of half-Jewish. They don't want to deny part of who they are. If this conference marks the death of the term half-Jewish, I would be fine with that. I know it's not going to happen because some value it and use it. And I also know that Adam Sandler's Hanukkah song has a lot more reach than I do. And the last lesson is that there are no easy answers. Maya's story shows the examples of complexity of intercultural family life. Her father's Catholicism, she said, was translated into emphasizing Judaism and Jewishness, Shabbat observance in their own way, Shabbat dinners, annoyance at being called the Shabbos Goy when he takes it more seriously than the neighbors do. Remember the dominant Jewish response? Prevention, conversion, outreach if only necessary. We tend to agree prevention in an open society can do more harm. But you have to realize conversion does not make the issue of multi-heritage Judaism go away. We heard yesterday afternoon, even someone whose parents convert and then raise them exclusively Jewish still has non-Jewish grandparents, still experiences non-Jewish holidays and non-Jewish family culture, still knows her parents' stories, how they met, how they got married, how their parents reacted, where they come from. You see, it's the reverse of the secret Jewish heritage story. When someone finds out later in life that they were Jewish or that one of their parents were, they want to find out more about their family heritage and who they are. Why should the children of converted parents be even less curious about where their parents and their family come from? You see, what happens in this dynamic is a child of two parents who each consider themselves Jewish, one by choice, one by birth, they can still be a multi-heritage Jew. And for that matter, a child born to two born Jewish parents, who are each born to two born Jewish parents, can be a multi-heritage Jew. Our daughter has a grandfather who was born a Polish Catholic because of one of her grandmother's second marriages. He's not a step-grandfather to her. He's her Papa Steve Stawicki. He's a loving and caring part of her life, who comes with a Christmas tree and ornaments and celebrations. Now, are we, the not-so-young adult children of a newly intermarried parent, are we supposed to weep and moan, what did we do wrong? Oh, no! And finally, what can we in secular humanistic Judaism learn? Well, we have not lived up to our potential. We can get more of that 18% of American Jews who say they don't believe in a God. We can even get some of that 40% who don't believe in a God that's a personal force. We are a wonderful fit for so many of these heirs of intermarriage. We welcome and celebrate their parents when they get married. We affirm their right to celebrate all parts of their heritage and identity. We happily provide the Jewish community for an intercultural upbringing. We've been on record for almost 25 years accepting as Jewish anyone of Jewish descent and anyone who identifies with the history, culture, civilization, values, and fate of the Jewish people. Now, it is true, we might not be the best fit for a family or individual who wants both religious identities. If what they find to celebrate together is an active faith in God, no matter what you call him or her or them, then our humanistic philosophy might not be a good fit. But it is also true that the organized Jewish world has not used us as they should be using us. Some rabbis won't officiate at intermarriages. Or for that matter, they won't do weddings before 6 o'clock on a Saturday, even though that has nothing to do with sundown in July. That's their compromise. Now, they can make that choice. That's their value. After all, by the way, doing a wedding on a Saturday for me is not a problem because it's probably the most Jewish thing the audience has done on a Saturday in a long time. It's not like I'm dragging them out of synagogue to come to the service. In the end, officiating or not, that's their choice. But I don't object. If they respond positively and say, I don't feel comfortable doing it, but let me give you someone who can. Refer them to a positive Jewish connection. That's what the Jewish community could be using us for. We are an outreach denomination. We are a way to keep people Jewish and even bring them in from the wider world. But that can only happen if they know who we are and what we stand for, if they trust that we are serious and real, if they understand that we are not a threat in a zero-sum game for pieces of an ever-shrinking pie. We are a golden opportunity to expand the pie, which will transform the pie into something amazing and different that we can scarcely imagine. I want to end by answering the question we've asked again and again. Not is being half Jewish like being half pregnant, or is half Jewish no big deal anymore, or even the simple half Jewish? The question we want an answer for, be it Paul Golan's emphasis on meaning or Dan Liebenson's emphasis on Judaism as a technology, a tool to live a good life, is a simple question. Easy to ask. Why be Jewish? And if we don't take the God told you so answer, which, by the way, that line doesn't even work on Reform or Conservative Jews anymore, let alone secular humanistic Jews. Every movement can have their own answer, and every secular and humanistic Jew will have their own empowered individual answer. But I want to end this colloquium by giving you mine. I am Jewish because it gives me a sense of roots and rootedness. With roots in my personal past, with comfort in my own skin, I can celebrate and welcome other traditions and peoples as neighbors, as colleagues, even as a spouse, without fear of being lost, without fear of being blown away. I am Jewish because Judaism is a unique and beautiful culture, as all cultures are unique and beautiful. At a colloquium several years ago, Yehuda Bauer had a marvelous metaphor. He said that the Jews are a very small people. Maybe they're even a piccolo in a large orchestra. But if we don't play the piccolo, there will be no piccolo. There is something unique and beautiful about the piccolo, and the piccolo can make beautiful music with many, many instruments. That unique human beauty of Jewish culture and life is my family's creation. And many parts of that culture make my life, make the world around me better. My feelings of community, mutual support, the encouragement of lifetime learning, and more. I am Jewish because I can have the courage and strength of my convictions reinforced by my heritage and culture. Jews in the Crusades died rather than say words they did not believe. Words had meaning to them, as they do to me. I am Jewish because I am a stubborn son of a gun, and that is definitely a Jewish tradition. How are you legitimate? You're legitimate by chutzpah. More than the Jews have kept being stubborn has kept the Jews around. You do not get to tell me that I don't get to be Jewish. I am still here and still Jewish because I am going to fight for my right to be who I already am on my own terms. If you won't accept me, if you don't think that I'm Jewish or you don't think that what I do is Judaism, that's your problem. That's not my problem. If I lived my life by your standards, it would not be my life. And I refuse to surrender being Jewish to you. Even the Jewish values I reject, chauvinism and anti-feminism, insularity, those are the skeletons in my closets. Those are the knots on my family tree. As I believe Dan said, and I know our movement said in 1988, you're Jewish if you want to be. Yes, I am empowered by my learning and my experience to take ownership of who I am. This is not an arranged marriage, but I'm also definitely past the first date. But there is no one model of owning your being Jewish. Maya Escobar is just as assertive of her full Jewishness as I am, in similar and different ways with varying concepts and words, but with just as much passion, just as much love and anger and enthusiasm and stubbornness. That enthusiasm, that passion is contagious, and it's good for you. It's good to be passionate about things. Why not this? I am Jewish because I am Jewish. I'm part of the Jewish family. I was born and raised and live Jewish ethnicity and culture in all of its variety and diversity. If we have learned anything from our exploration of the heirs of intermarriage, it is that the most meaningful experience, the most meaningful life, is one where you are true to who you really are in all of your complexity and diversity and complications. the words of the Yiddish poet Itzik Pfeffer, the anthem for anyone who is crazy enough to join this crazy Jewish family, all you should need is your passport from half Jewish to Jewish. Ich bin a Yid, I am a Jew. Of course, you don't have to be Jewish. That wonderful ad slogan from Levy's Jewish Rye made into a beautiful poem that begins your program book by Roger Kamenetz. You don't have to be Jewish to love Levy's Rye. You could be black, Italian, a Cherokee with very large teeth, grinning over a corned beef sandwich. You don't have to be Jewish to love, certainly or uncertainly. You don't have to be Jewish to love Levy's Rye, or to love anything. A single caraway seed, or in the rough black seed of the 4 o'clock enclosed in pastel petals late afternoon, you know it's there, and you don't have to be Jewish. You don't have to be Jewish to walk a mile with the sun going down Rosie in the park, or to love Rosie in the park or at home, and Rosie loves you back. You don't have to be Jewish to chew slowly, tasting the rye breaking down into sugar. You just have to be willing to slow down time to a poster, a still photograph of you in your ethnic garb in the days when ethnicity was okay, not yet terrifying or indistinct. Kiss me, I'm Irish, and kiss me again, I'm gay, Italian, Chinese, and no parking this space reserved for Polish. You don't have to be Jewish. You could be anything amazing or distinct. You could have just once, for maybe an hour, a day, forgotten you were different. You don't have to be Jewish. You don't have to be to love bread. You don't have to be Rye to love Jewish, but it helps. Thank you very much, and shalom.